It's 7 o'clock on a Sunday night. Let's get to it. It's Topical starts right now. A very good evening to you, South Africa, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical. Our digital audience with us tonight. Good to see them. Good to have them on their program, eager to get their comments in a short while. Allegations of racism in various schools around the country have surfaced. Fresh developments today. The Gauteng MEC for Education will be launching an independent investigation into Pretoria High School for girls to determine whether a culture of racism exists at the school. Now, you'll remember this follows the disciplinary hearing conducted by the SGB for 12 learners from the school who were suspended for suspected racism. Now, they were all subsequently found not guilty on all charges. According to the Provincial Department of Education statement, the independent investigation will not investigate the 12 learners, but rather allegations that racism exists at the school. What do you make of this process, the process that these learners went through? We will discuss that in a short while. Put that matter to one side for a bit. Let's talk about racism in the broader sense in our society. Racism humiliates not only the victim, but the perpetrator as well. So, if that quote rings true, then why does it persist? Is it because we live insular lives, we create these bubbles for ourselves, these echo chambers mouthing off in our comfort zone, spitting vile remarks aimed at proving you superior? And no one corrected you today, so you must be right? Until the proverbial mess hits the fan and someone hears you. Now there's consequences to deal with. Question, how do we get to the root cause? We have to talk about it with the aim of finding practical solutions to this problem. There's the question on your screen. That's the question of the week. What are your views on how racist behavior is dealt with in schools? Let us know at SABC News_TV. Let's head over to the magic wall. The umbrella question, I guess, is how do we foster a culture of inclusivity in our schools, but in the broader sense in our society as well? What fuels racism? Could it be inequality? Let us know. Share your thoughts at SABC News_TV. Perspective coming up. All right, magic wall time. What we know and why it matters. Now, some of the schools here on your screen, these are the allegations of racism that emerged of late. Some involve learners, and in one case, a teacher. Now, it must be noted that these allegations against these schools at this stage are allegations, and that investigations are continuing. So we await the outcome. In fact, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development released a statement saying it's engaging the Department of Basic Education and will be monitoring how these matters will be handled. So will we, which moves us on to how should racism be handled, right? The Institute for Justice and Reconciliation has some insights. Let's run through them for a bit. It says these are the action points to combat racism in SA schools. Acknowledge that racism persists, right? Create safe spaces for dialogue and critical conversation. Hold perpetrators accountable. Understand that racism is systemic and structural. Mandatory anti-racism education. Understanding the impact of racism on young people's mental health and well-being. Important one here. Be proactive, not reactive. It ticks all the boxes, right? I'll talk to you a bit about that in terms of practical expression of this. I want to talk to you about what the department or the Basic Education Rights Handbook actually says regarding promoting equality in education. Again, a list addresses discrimination through policies, ensure fairness through proactive monitoring, foster an inclusive learning environment for all, provide support and training for staff, integrate equality education into the curriculum. All of these things are great on paper, great on the slide as well. But is it implemented to its fullest? That's the big question. That's always an issue, implementation. Has it been given practical expression in our schools, by extension in our society? We will discuss with our guests in a short while. I want to get you your take now. We went to the streets of Johannesburg, a regular feature, the Word on the Street feature. We took to Gauteng streets seeking diverse insights and perspective. And oh boy, there were a lot of perspectives on this issue, a lot of opinions. How do we get to that better place? This is what you had to say.
It definitely starts at home. You can't just come to school and learn things from other people without having some kind of background knowledge about it. Yes, friends can be a bad influence even if you're from a good family, but it's very rare that that actually happens. So it definitely starts at home. And also, like, sometimes, especially in schools like that school, the teachers play a role into it. Actually, in a school with a lot of white teachers, they actually enable it with the white kids, and they're like, yeah, do it, and they don't even, they're always taking the white kids' side, and there's no, like, they're not trying to stop it. So obviously, if you know you're going to do something, you're not going to get in trouble as a child, you're going to do it.
It usually stems from the root of how you are raised as a child. So I'll say that it is partially the parent, but also the student themselves, because you're the one who decides how you're going to behave in society.
I think it comes from the parents. If the parents are still stuck in the past, they hear about the park and stuff, it affects the learners. So when they go to school, what they heard from home, they like basically played out at school against other kids, basically black and white. If my parents are speaking badly about black people, parents speaking badly about white people, when I come to school, I look at the other person as like, you know, that racism and all that. So I think it starts at home.
I blame the Department of Education because they are just reacting. They are reacting every year to allegations of racism, and this thing is going to be swept under the carpet. Nothing is going to happen. Next year, the same thing is going to happen again.
I do think that some learners do learn it at home, but just like about there are parents whereby they still have apartheid in them. They still feel like one of us, we still need to be treated as we were treated back then.
All right, as always, we appreciate your thoughts on this matter. Let's get the discussion underway. We've got lots to unpack, limited time. No one's born a racist, right? It's a learned thing. It's a learned behavior. But how do we change mindsets in this regard? My guest tonight, Likho Bottoman, Director, Department of Basic Education, Schools Inclusion, Social Inclusion. Thank you very much indeed. Professor Boitumelo Senokoane, Unisa School of Humanities. We also have among our digital audience, but a guest there joining us virtually, Matakanye Matakanya, General Secretary, National Association of School Governing Bodies. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for joining us. Also our digital audience as well. Hope you can hear me loud and clear. If you have any comments, please raise your hand, your virtual hand, and I'll do my very best to get your comments and your questions on air. Thank you very much indeed. All right, let's start with you, Likho. And Control, put up the graphic with regards to the Gauteng Education Department statement. They saying that they respect the decision of the school governing body of the Pretoria High School for Girls. So learners suspended for suspected racism and were subsequently found not guilty, all of them. What do you make of this whole process that they were put through?
I think, Blaine, it's very important for us to consider the fact that the Department of Education in Gauteng is indicating that there was inconclusive evidence that shows that there was any sense of racism in that school. That's the first thing. And because we're governed by the rule of law as the Department of Basic Education working together with the school governing bodies, it is therefore also important that we give the due time and space that is required for school governing bodies to do what is required. But what is nice about the situation is that it doesn't just end at reinstatement of the 12 learners and nothing else is going to be done. There's going to be a process of escalation which has been proposed by the Department of Education in Gauteng, where now they're not just going to look at the 12 learners only, but they will look at the ethos of the school as a whole. Because for us, that's very important. The ethos of the school should be rights-based, it should be socially inclusive, and it should be socially cohesive.
So the department, although these learners were found not guilty, the department still feels that there's something there that's not quite correct with regards to racism allegations.
I think because it's not for the first time that we're dealing with something of this nature, with the same school in particular. It calls,
and you're referring to the hair issue?
Yes, absolutely.
2016?
Yes, so I think it's important for us to really put it to bed in whatever way possible. Our responsibility is to ensure that we protect the well-being of children and we protect their rights as well as we do all of this. So it's very important that we become responsive. In fact, Blaine, I think South Africa needs to pat itself on the shoulder actually, because in the past we had children who did not even voice out when they were being violated. So we've got a very good problem at the moment in as far as that school is concerned, because we've got young people who have come forward, who have reported, because there seems to be a sense of an understanding of what one's rights are supposed to be and one's responsibilities are supposed to be. But I think we need to guide the process in which then the school and the department responds to those cases.
Right. Prof, was this the best way to handle the situation?
Look, it depends. You know, the issues pertaining to disciplinaries are always complicated and complex for a simple reason. It will depend on what is the policy, what is drafted, what is entailed in the policy. That will give us a direction on more or less how does the school intends to deal with any issues pertaining to racism or any other matter for that effect. But the other thing that will make a determination is the person who wrote the charges, the author of the charges. Let's use it, for a lack of better word, the initiator of the charges. Depending on who crafted the charges, that might have implications for the outcome. And of course, the department might say, look, we are happy with this because within, the charges themselves, there was no reference to racism itself. Yeah. And that, limited the committee, the panel itself, and the chairperson. Therefore, what they were looking for, if it was the issues of, for example, bullying and violence, the outcome, because the expectation was on something else rather. Therefore, you cannot expect someone to be found guilty of racism while the charges were on something else, completely different.
Right, so the scope is important here in terms of the investigation.
Correct.
Mr. Matakanya, the SGB's authority is enshrined in the South African Schools Act, the authority there to undertake such hearings, etc. Now you have a subsequent investigation from the Department of Education in Gauteng. You think that's the route to take in order to get to the bottom of this?
Thank you very much, Blaine, and good evening to my fellow South Africans, as well as all the viewers. It is true that it is enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic. It's also enshrined in the South African Schools Act that the power lies with us. The power lies with the school governing bodies. And I think I have commented a lot that, look, we want to commend the school governing body to have done its work, firstly, by listening to the report, the reported case, and suspended those 12 girls. And that is the task that they are given by the piece of legislation. Then second step is that they have taken those children through the process of hearing, and then also bringing along their parents. Then that process was done, and we just heard that now the process has ended and the children were not found guilty and they were all discharged. So that is the power that we have as school governing body, as National Association of School Governing Body. That is the power that we have. Once there is that, because also the policy is crafted by us, that there must be no racism in our schools.
Right. That's the aim. But are you worried or concerned in any way that there might be a bit of a crossover or stepping on toes as far as the SGB doing their work and the department now starting an investigation, an independent investigation?
There is that possibility because this animal, we thought by the end of 1994, it had been killed. Now, after 30 years, even before 30 years, you remember, Blaine, how many times that it reared its head, this animal called racism. Now, after 30 years, we are still talking about one thing, racism. So we are a little worried. We are not just worried about this school. No, we are worried about this animal that is impacting the lives of all South Africans. And I don't think this is only for our children. I think the government must stand up and ensure that, because you see, these animals come far, 375 years.
Yes.
You remember when there was this thing in Afrikaans called blanke and no blanke, if you remember, white and no white. I think people may just think that this thing is very small. It's big, and it was legislated to be separate development. Black people this side, white people this side. Then it is now catch-upping with us.
Yeah.
So you may think that now, because there are still remnant who are yearning for those years where then black people had their own toilets, white people have their own toilets, then they still feel that now the white people must have their school, black people must have their school. So we are saying, maybe the answer you blame quickly is that this word black and white must be cancelled in this game. We must just be called South Africans. Why other people are just called by their countries, Europeans? There's no black and white in Europe and all those things. Now in South Africa, I believe now because this black and white has a very bad history, because it was legislated in this country to separate people according to their color,
right,
and say, go this way, this. And these children are still taught. And the economy of scale also still in the hands of those people who were enjoying racism then. You see, our sisters, our mothers, our brothers, and they're still working under those things.
Yes.
So these children are taught at home to see these people. You see them. Then these are slaves. They work for you. These are slaves. They work for you. So when they go to school, they carry what their communities are saying. They carry what their parents are saying.
Yes.
So we just have to deal with the parents and deal with this word itself. I think I want to propose strongly that it must go.
So it's a sensitive issue, Likho, especially what complicates the issue is that you're dealing with minors. You're dealing with children, and you don't want to foment more division and hatred within a school system. And I'm not only talking about the Pretoria Girls' School. This can be a general lesson for all schools in terms of undertaking this process. How do you investigate racism without sowing further division?
It's very difficult to really investigate something of this nature, but I think the research arena in South Africa has given us so much precedence on how you investigate matters of this nature without necessarily causing harm on the research subjects. And I think that there is a very good precedence and very good principle that you can draw from that when we do it. And I think it's also going to be very important for the investigation to not only look at systemic issues, but to also look at the lived experiences of those children. And so the only way to do that is to engage those children about those lived experiences. That means that we need to create a protective layer when we do that investigation, because we may trigger some very traumatic experiences amongst these children, that once we find the data that we're looking for the evidence, that we're able to then debrief the children.
Right. And as Mr. Matakanye was saying, Prof, it needs to go beyond learners, right? As we keep on saying, it's the refrain, nobody is born racist, it's a learned behavior. So you have to include the parents, you have to include the educators. It needs to be digging a lot deeper than the surface allegations.
Yes, you are correct. The only difference that I have with Mr. Matakanye is that our point of departure should not be denialism, denying that we are different. We are different. The only problem that then we'll have to deal with is how you are treated different because of the color of your skin. Others can then get privilege because they are white or either black, depending on who's dominant in the space. So we'll have to deal with fundamentals, the philosophy that leads us to becoming racist in our approach and our way of living, giving preference to others because we believe that they belong to a particular group of skin color. So denying that, then we will persist, the problem will persist, we'll never be able to get to the root of the problem. Right. The first fundamental thing is to acknowledge that there is a problem. And in this regard, the problem was, as identified, a WhatsApp group has been opened only for a specific group of people of a particular culture. Then that's where we must start to say, why did that happen? That should be the question that we should be asking.
Let's go to our digital audience now and get some of their comments. Control, if you could, I can't see the names in the bottom, so let's sort that matter out. But I see Neo's hand went up. Neo, let's get your take.
All right, Blade, good evening to you and good evening to the viewers and evening to the colleagues. This is a very sensitive matter that we are addressing here, because if you look at what the history of the Jews, the path they went through, anti-Semitism is taken very seriously all over the globe. It's not something that is taken seriously in one area. So us to be still dealing with racism in 2014 is actually a disgrace. And for us to go on national television discussing racism, it's actually a disgrace for our country. Because if you look at people all over the world, they are making points about racism using South Africa, that remember when this happened in South Africa. So I believe that we're supposed to be past the whole phase of addressing this issue. We should be at a point where we are addressing many other things that we are suffering with in this country. And this one shouldn't be one of them. So just to go further, I think we have to get to a point where racism is dealt with as a crime that it is.
Right.
Because apartheid itself is and still is regarded to as a crime. So I think we should get to a point where people are educated of the consequences of this behavior and what can be the consequences or the repercussions of being found guilty of this particular crime, which is racism. So we have to go.
So harsher punishments. Yeah.
Yes, because I think we are being lenient towards it. Because if you look at the issue in Pinelands, where it's not, and now it goes back to saying it's not an issue of black and white, because now you get colored people putting a black child in a cage and auctioning him as if it's a slave heir. So you now see that it's no longer an issue of black, white. I think it's an issue of the division that the monster itself called racism creates within the country. So I think we not only as at the school level or in any level of institutions in South Africa, whether it's work or whatever it is, it should be addressed the way it is, which is a crime. It's not something that we can really talk about. It's something that
handles, I guess, one part of the problem, right? It's after the fact. The deed has been done. But I wonder, how do we get rid of the hateful ideology to start off with, That's the bigger issue for me. Let's hear from Dean.
Thank you. And what's fascinating is that in this country, unlike the civil rights incident, let's say in the States, instead of integration, true integration, as had been spoken of before by Mr. Matakanya and the professor there hasn't really been a true inclusion. And by that I mean, by contrast, over there, what had happened is that people were basically, and by that I mean students, learners, etc., were bussed in, if need be, even with the aid of the military, in order to integrate schools. If you look at the social landscape in South Africa, where you find schools in Lokshin, in townships, you find that they're almost exclusively African. And clearly that is a consequence or bleeding on from the times of apartheid, as was discussed. So the question then is not merely racism per se, but the fact, and it is racism, of course, but where does it start from? And that is the fact that we haven't actually come to a point where we are living cheek and jowl. We've come to a point where we are actually still 30 years on, still living in segregated communities. And what is happening, I believe, in the schools is an extension of that.
Yeah.
I think very interesting is Professor Jonathan Jansen, where he writes Knowledge in the Blood. And I think that's worthwhile reading and should be prescribed reading almost for all of us as South Africans, where he expounds on his experiences in that. But what I can also mention is, besides that, the racism per se is the sense of ownership. I've interviewed quite a number of people in the Indian community around Etikweni, and you could say it's more qualitative rather than quantitative research. But they mentioned, for example, Durban Westville, Emil Sultan, and so forth, were built, as they say, by Indian community and as were sponsored by them. Be that as it may, they're now saying that since the quota system came in thereafter, it's almost like it's become almost exclusively African. Yeah. And the point is not my words, I'm just carrying across. So the thing is, there's a feeling like, why has what we've built, what we've used our own hands and labor and money to build, being taken over? So there are these sorts of issues, and I believe we've got to actually come to a true understanding of how we effectively and cooperatively are going to achieve social cohesion in order to avoid and displace racism.
I guess the concoction of inequality combined with misinformation and disinformation and being insular and, you know, sticking within your own community and just being this echo chamber of negativity foments these issues, right? And nobody says otherwise because you're within your space, you're within your bubble. And that further exacerbates the situation. Lisa, let's hear from you and then Lotta. Lisa, if you can unmute. It seems that we're having a bit of an issue.
Evening to you, Blaine, and
Go ahead.
viewers. Can you hear,
yes,
me, Blaine?
Now you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. I've been listening to the audiences that you have there in the studio, and I've been making some notes, especially on the investigations that were raised, that they may trigger some of the experiences that the learners may experience at their schools. From a criminological perspective, I feel racism is a hate crime, and is a hate crime that is motivated by is motivated by certain groups to other groups, and I believe such instances, they need to be prosecuted, and also from prosecutions there must be evidence that need to take place. So I believe the starting point is to create anti-racist policies in schools that will be reviewed time in time from a racist perspective.
What would be an example of an anti-racism policy?
An example can be a matter of incorporating both the people of the color. I feel like if there can be a decolonization of the curriculum, those are the things that we can look at in our schools. If we can decolonize the curriculum, make it an education friendly, whereby the teachers as well will understand what is happening, because you may find out that there are unconscious biases when it comes to racism. Yes. There's a leader or a principal position to ignore or silence other teachers when they raise such issues.
Yeah.
So I feel like these things, they need to be addressed, and investigations need to take place by an external team,
Right.
not by a team within the school, by an external team that won't be silenced maybe by the principal or by the SGB.
Right.
I feel like since when I read about what is happening in Pretoria High School for Girls, this is not a new phenomenon that is happening. It has happened before. What were the verdict of those investigations that took place?
Right.
And then it needs to start within the district within the district education department.
Right. Okay, so let's leave there. I have to take a quick break now.
It needs to go to a...
Right. We get your point. The issue of racial connotation, microaggression, these kind of terms need to be better understood, the facets of racism, so it can be easily identified, because sometimes it's obvious and then sometimes it's subtle, but we need to pick up on that. A lot, I'm going to come back to you. I need to take a quick break. We're trying to find solutions, right? It's not just about pontificating and saying, you know what, don't do it. How? What's a practical example of how we get to that better place we keep on talking about on this show in terms of stemming or putting paid to racism in this country? 30 years, we're still dealing with it. Solutions next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. We're talking about racism, emotive topic, emotive issue. We are currently dealing with allegations of racism at school levels. You would have thought that this generation of children would be over that. How do we socialize our children is important. What sort of responsibility should me as a parent take in terms of how my child is interacting, how they speaking, how they thinking? It's an important point. I want to go back to our digital audience very quickly before we get comments from our guest. Lotta, before the break, you had your hand up. Your comment, question? If you can unmute, Lotta.
I've done that. Good evening to your viewers.
Good evening.
Good evening to you. Look, I had the submissions made by the colleagues here, but I think the issue is that we always tiptoe around the issues of racism, because even the colleagues here in the studio, they do not want to use race to identify and define themselves, such as black and white. That is important because if you are to look at the Black Land First and the segregation acts that were there, who was the victim of such acts? It was the black person. So why should we now suddenly forget about the crimes of the past and come back and want to unite? The biggest problem here is that even when there was that TRC commission, people were forgiven. It was an amnesty process instead of people being punished. This is why now we can see my colleague makes a submission that racism is a hate crime. Of course, it is a hate crime, but it is not being prosecuted. Why are these people not being arrested for that? The SGB itself has allowed the Bella Bill to go ahead and to sit right in front of the president to be signed off. That bill in itself has got only one word of racism. There's no mechanism that criminalizes racism within the school, within our society. So the racism in itself is a systematic act that is designed to segregate, to attack black people. There's nothing else that we're going to achieve, because every time we're always reactive. We can see now the cases of 2024, but I can tell you, Churo schools have been into this, the Pineland School have been into this, the Pretoria School have been into this throughout. So you would see as well that you must go into these schools, look at the infrastructure, look at the schools, the passive racism that is there. Look at the sports facilities. Look at how these are being funded. Look at the. I
want to get a sense of it. You mentioned an interesting term, and we've been hearing these terms. You know, microaggression. You say passive racism, racial connotations. What would you give as an example of passive racism?
Passive racism is that one of saying, no, I'm not racist. I've got black friends. I've got a maid that stays in Alexandra, and we can eat from the same plate. That in itself is racist, because why should we even be looking at that? What we need to be dealing with here is an issue of equity, not equality. We do not need equality, because equality in itself discriminates, because you are basically saying child A and child B, they are the same, therefore they must both move forward. You do not take care of the historical disadvantages that this child brings into this forum. So we need the equity, where we're going to design programs that are going to deal with these pre-colonial and apartheid issues that we have dealt with. We need to move forward that way. And also, I just want to deal also with the issues around the white colleagues. There are those who are racist and there are those who are not racist. White colleagues should stop saying and telling us on how we should accept racism. We are not going to accept and move on because they are telling us to move on. They are not the victims here. They are the perpetrators. We have been the one who were discriminated against. The Stats SA in itself knows, which is part of government, that black people and far less than the white counterparts, that thing goes back to the schools as well, where white teachers earn more. The SGB sitting here is not doing anything. The SGB is just an association, is not going to be able to deal with these issues, because even if you ask them now, in terms of the historical records of racism, what is their prediction of what will happen in 2025 and 2026, and how are they going to make sure that these schools are not faced? All other schools, look at for instance now, this issue was an issue of white supremacy, where it was white versus black, but now the coloreds have came in to also participate in this thing as well, where they are only attacking the same victim, which is the black people. This segregation needs to end.
I got your point. Important points. Mr. Matakanya, are SGBs, are educators equipped or are capacitated or have the skills to deal with issues that Lotta has mentioned? If you can unmute, Mr. Matakanya.
No, they are really not equipped. You must understand the composition of SGB. And the composition of SGB are teachers. In the high school, we have got learners, we have got parents, then we have got support staff. Principal is part of that. It's part of SGB. But now you look at the component, you may think that now, okay, the teachers and not all parents, not all parents, but some of parents really, they do not understand the legal framework of, I mean, not that they cannot govern, they can govern, but they govern within the laws. And I've quoted the Constitution, I've quoted South African schools, there's National Education Act, and etc. And those, you put them together, then they give you power to govern. You know, so that's why Section 19 of South African Schools Act indicates very clearly that the department must continuously capacitate the school governing body with their money appropriated by legislature. So I believe the department is failing. It's failing there to ensure that now these school governing bodies are free, or if not, and we realized, we have been arguing with these people that, look, let's extend this 3 years, it'd be 5 years, because, I mean, immediately you train these people, when you think they start now implementing what they learned, then the term of office comes to an end. You see, so those are things that I think the government, Department of Education must look into and ensure that now people who are good, they are dealing with serious matter and they are not being taken serious at some times. Then you find that now all these players, when they come in, they take away the powers of the school governing bodies.
Right. Likho, maybe respond to that, and what more can the department do now in order to effect change?
We've got an incoming cohort of SGBs. Mr. Matakanye is quite aware of that. And since last year, we have agreed with them as the National Consultative Forum on School Governing Bodies that as part of the induction and orientation of new school governing bodies, we need to give them content on these issues around discrimination and prejudice and related intolerances. But
What content?
Basically just content around what these issues are. Because, for example, Blaine, at the moment, when we engage with SGBs, we realize that we don't quite agree on what constitutes discrimination.
Right.
And so I think we need to start there on conceptual foundations of all of these issues and then move to management practices and processes around these issues and agreeing that that's the way to go about it, which is constitutional, which is the midline of all of this. Because, by the way, SGPs themselves do come with their own subconscious biases on these issues. And I think we just need to clear the air first on those so that we all agree on what the starting point is going to be, what we understand about these concepts, and what we think should be done by school management teams, by SGPs, by teachers, by learners themselves.
Yeah.
I think that, Blaine, as South Africa, we are in the right place at the moment, especially in basic education, because at least we can see now that what we have been punting through curriculum is coming to fruition. We're saying to young people, stand up for yourself. Raise it when you feel suppressed, when you feel suffocated. Do raise it. But what we now need to do is to bring a system that will match that new kind of a child, that will say, when you come forward, this is what you can expect from the basic education system.
Prof, learners being wiser, I would maybe say that's a plus in terms of identifying when abuse or when discrimination is taking place. But are we in that better space 30 years down the line dealing with, give us some context in terms of a country that has dealt with what we've dealt with. 30 years down the line, we have these allegations now. What would you make or say in terms of the progress?
Look, we are still lagging in terms of progress. If you look into history, the first introduction of a school in 1658, there was a purpose on why a school was introduced in South Africa. It was to civilize. And two important components were brought in. To first, to the issue of teaching the slave Dutch language. And you'll note that with language comes culture, customs, traditions, and so on and so forth. By that, the default would mean that then the one would then dominate and dictate and become superior by introducing one's culture, customs, and so on and so forth. The second element was to ensure that there was Christian education, and also that comes with its own baggage. So if you have to go back into that history, we must ask whether now the concept of, or the introduction of civilizing the other, have we moved away from that? Especially if you look into the type of language that we are still using today at our own schools, the introduction of the type of curriculum that we are using today at schools, does it define the African worldview? That's a question that we should be asking. Does it say anything about what Africans can put on the table and offer as a means or a mode of education? It is not necessarily the case. What we are doing, in fact, we are pushing an agenda of reformation or reformist agenda, in a sense that we do not address the problem of inheritance of what we then took over from other nations or civilizations. Therefore, Africans are at a minus.
Hands up on digital wall. Deed, let's get your take first of all.
Okay, just briefly, quickly. So, as I agree a lot with what Mr. Lotomayano is saying, you know, I think the more that we can really take hands. I'll give you a quick example. Skin is an incredible movie that powerfully motivates us, I believe, to move away from racism when it demonstrates just what went on during apartheid and how evil it was, especially in the school system. Another one, of course, is from abroad. Okay, that's called Pride. And when you see that, when you see the power that comes through united effort against racism in schools, and that's exactly what happened truly there. It's a true incident. We can be motivated. Third thing quickly is I believe when we actually do role play, as part of acting, what I do, there's something called the Bruce Gunn Film Institute. It's brilliant. Get together and you can do it in the schools. We take it to people as part of social development. It's powerful because you say, listen, you, well, this is through the coach, acting coach, act as the part of the one who, as it were under the boss. Okay, this is a typical role play. And that would be the servant. And then much later on, that person suffers and so forth, and then it switches, and then the other person suffers, and you actually see tears coming when they actually can get into their shoes. The problem is largely racism when you can't feel the other person's shoe, you don't feel their pain, you don't know what they go through, and that was a big problem during apartheid. This is the white privilege that's being addressed, is the arrogance. And I can say that as a white person. But the problem is, if we're not grappling with it, and we're not also inviting all of us, including ourselves as white people, to the table and to action and activate things, it's just not going to happen. We've got to keep working on it. Thanks.
Lotta?
Yeah, I'm here again. Thanks for acknowledging those points, and to other colleagues as well. We have been made to see the world through the imperialist and capitalist view from Africa. And unfortunately, the conditions in Africa, they are very different. So you would have seen, for instance, in Roodepoort, where an issue of segregation and racism was raised, again, in the Kuro school, the white parents came on one side against the black children. It was almost a tussle of parents outside the school. This is because of denial. They are denying the fact that there's racist, and they themselves as racist. I'm happy that Dean would then say they need to come into the table. But unfortunately, we are coming with a minus on the table because we are the victims. And you guys, you are the beneficiaries of the colonial and apartheid system. So what needs to happen, the SGB themselves, if we have to correct and look into this, we have to look at who teaches history. Because white people in this country, they need to be able to get the accurate appreciation of the history so that the history of this country is not distorted. At the moment, people tiptoe around this thing of race. And I can tell you now, if you look through the history books, they teach about Orania. What is there to acknowledge and teach about Orania? They only teach about Mandela. Mandela is not the only struggle hero that took us through liberation. There's other heroes that we need to be looking at, that they had a better contribution onto the table. The problem with us as black people, again, we come in here and we apologize. We become apologetic. There is no system that is going to take us away from out of this racial thing unless we move with a radical system. And that radical system means if you as a teacher, you've been found guilty of either be a subtle racism, passive racism, you will be excluded, expelled, jailed, and you'll be taken out completely out of the school system to an extent that you can't even interact with your own children. Right. Because even at home, you are teaching your own children this racism, similarly to learners as well. So we must approach this thing. Yeah, we must approach this thing from a legal point of view, because the policies that are done at the corporate level, they do not work. We have seen that.
I've got 30-second wrap from each. Prof, firstly to you, way forward.
Look, we need to work on how we socialize our children. It starts from within our families, churches themselves are a problem in this discourse. Schools, therefore, will have to, legislatures must come on board in ensuring that the laws that are there will speak to the realities on the ground.
I do think that, yes, parents do have a role to play in socializing their children, but I think more so stakeholders need to give space to the basic education sector so that when we do this transformative work broadly, not just even with racism, that we don't block one another, because we all have got the same goal in mind, and that is to make sure that our schools are inclusive and cohesive.
Thank you very much indeed. We got to go. Time is not on our side. But thank you very much indeed also to Mr. Matakanya as well for your take. Digital audience, value added, no doubt. Conversation continues. Thank you very much indeed. All right, before we go, here's my take. Love one another, be kind. You read about it in religious scripture. You see it on coffee mugs. But do we realize the importance of it? I often forget its importance. Me as a deeply flawed human being, you'd expect it, right? Be kind. It's not always easy. It takes a concerted effort, but it's worth it. Look, I don't know what the right solutions are to this problem, but I think let's lean into that. Be kind. It's simple, yes, but it's also consequential. Think about the ripple effect if you have to approach a person with no judgment. No, this is what someone said about you, so how I'm going to start my interaction with you or my relationship with you, I'm predicated on that. In the workplace, in your personal life, be kind. Perhaps we should start perfecting what is regarded as simple, because that's how we build and become better. Let's get the basics right. Be kind. Racist utterances are ugly. It's sometimes, as you heard it, obvious, and other times it's subtle, but it hurts both ways. So we have to continue to talk about it in the search for better solutions. These issues can't be swept under the carpet. Why? Because often what you ignore, you empower. And that's my take. If you miss anything on this program, be sure to watch this episode of Topical on YouTube. Democracy 30 up next with Oliver Dixon. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Big night on the sporting front. It's going to be starting in a short while. Big night for South African sprinters. Trust that SABC News has you covered with regards to all the latest from the Olympic Games in Paris. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.